Well, this is the first update on the 16 valve project. You can see here that we've finished the black car. That's right, we finished stripping it. I know I had some comments on the first video that says, hey, you're leaving some good parts on that car. In fact, we had one guy, he wanted to buy the body. Well, this car, you know, I actually had a couple comments where people said, well, why are you parting out the black car? It looks pretty good. Well, you really didn't see the bad side. So look here, you can see it got hit really hard, pushed the car right into the back seat, you know, cage area. So, yeah, granted, you can see here that anything's repairable, but by the time I got the car, you know, it had already been taken apart. So it certainly wasn't worth going back and saying, well, let's put a new clip on the back of this one. It's just not worth it. And somebody wanted to buy the body from me, and you can see here, look at that, it doesn't even roll. We took the entire front suspension off, we took all the rear suspension off, we pulled everything out of the inside, and we even pulled the gas tank. Yes, it had a really super clean gas tank inside. So we're ready to send this car off to Mercedes heaven. It's kind of sad to see it go. I know, another 16 valve has bit the dust. But it's on to the smoked silver car, and right now I've been prepping the engine. So let's move on over to the engine, and I'll show you what I've been doing to that. Here's where I am on the engine today. You know, he said the engine had been rebuilt, but you know, I've learned a long time ago, you have to be really careful believing what people tell you. Sometimes it's, you know, not deliberate, they just may not know. I had one guy tell me his engine had been overhauled, and I looked at the paperwork and it basically had a valve job. Now, it wasn't that he was trying to be dishonest, he thought that a valve job was overhauling the engine. So you have to be a little careful. Before I stick this engine in the car, I don't want to be pulling it out again, so I was a little careful on how I looked at the engine, some of the things I did, and I'll explain that to you now. The first thing I did was open up the valve cover. Looking inside the engine can tell you a lot about how the engine's been treated, how frequent the oil changes, and particularly maybe how many miles on it. Look at this. Look at how clean the cams and the lifter areas are. You can tell there's no sludge buildup. This doesn't appear. There's no wear on the cam lobes. So the chain is very tight. So that all passed a visual inspection. And then we went ahead and pulled the transmission off. I wanted to see what the clutch and pressure plate looked like. I mean, that can sometimes tell you how many miles are on an engine. And I could still see the machine marks on the flywheel. The pressure plate had no scoring on it. The clutch plate was right almost up to spec with maybe 10 to 15% of wear. But one thing I did do while I had the transmission off, I do this all the time, is I look at that throwout bearing and I look at that pilot bearing in the flywheel and I said, I'm going to replace them. I mean, they're not very expensive, and since I already had it all apart, we went ahead and put those new parts in. And then moving on to the front of the engine, you know, I saw a little bit of wetness around the front crank seal. I thought, now this is another good opportunity to just replace that front crank seal. Sometimes they're not installed properly, and sometimes that rear spring can pop off. So even if the engine doesn't have a lot of miles on it, if you're showing any wetness around the front crank seal when you remove it, you just do it then. It's a lot easier to do it out of the car. And then finally, to determine the internal health of this engine, I decided to do a cranking compression test. Now there's some disadvantages to this. Number one, I couldn't run the engine and get it up to temperature. The engine's been sitting for a long time. I don't know how long. That means the oil has drained away from the rings. So you may not get a 100% accurate either compression or leak down test, but at least I wanted to see if I had compression. And we hooked the starter, the battery up. We put the compression tester on, went through number 1, 2, 3, 4 cylinder, and they looked pretty good except number 1 cylinder. It was down, and I was a little bit concerned about it. I'm thinking, oh no, you know, am I going to have to pull the cylinder head? And I really didn't want to do that at this point. So what I did is I took a 50-50 mix of engine oil and STP, and I put it down into number 1 cylinder. Then we hooked the starter up, we cranked it, we blew out the excess, and then we retested the compression. Now, when you do that, if you have a problem with a valve, you know, we thought, well, maybe we got a bad valve, we might have to pull the head and do a valve job. If you put that excess sticky, high viscosity oil in the cylinder and retest, and you have a leaky valve, you won't have hardly any change in the compression reading. And when we did this, the compression came right up on number 1 cylinder. So that indicates maybe a little wear on those piston rings in number 1, but more likely it's just the fact that this engine has sat for so long without running. I remember this one diesel I had that for 2 years, been sitting for 2 years. I brought it home, couldn't even get it started, had no compression at all. I pulled the injectors out, put a whole bunch of STP oil mix in there, cranked it over, blew all the excess out, put the injectors in, fired that baby up, and drove it for a week, and then retested it with compression was fine, and it turned out to be a great engine. The fact was it had sat for 2 years and all the oil had drained away from those rings, and I wasn't getting any compression at all. So compression looks good, internal inspection looks good. I don't see any other areas of any wetness leaks, and so we're going to be putting the intake manifold assembly back on and get ready to install this in the car. So on the next video, you may even see this baby purr.